The entirety of this level is complete fiction. This is just ridiculous. None of these dates make sense. They would never do this in real life. Did they even think before adding this? Listing every historical inaccuracy in Call of Duty World at War. There's a surprising amount to them, so prepare yourself and let's do this. The game starts by showing us this map of Axis-controlled territories in Europe. However, it places all of the Axis countries under just Germany, and also shows Germany having occupied parts of Switzerland, Spain, and Turkey, despite all of these countries never being invaded as they are neutral during World War II. Following this, we see the Japanese-controlled territories, which on this map shows Japan controlling all of Sakhalin Island, despite the fact that during this period, Japan only controlled the south half of this island, with the Soviets controlling the north. Don't get me wrong, I love these cutscenes and how they use actual historical footage, but we will come to notice that they keep getting things incorrect, such as here where the game shows footage of the Nanjing Massacre with the caption of Indochina 1937. However, this massacre occurred in Nanjing, mainland China, not Indochina. And it could be argued that perhaps the caption has no relation to the footage shown and is instead referring to the Japanese invasion of the Indochina region. However, this would still not make sense as French Indochina was not invaded by Japan until 1940. Here we see what appears to be Japanese A6M0 fighters dropping bombs on Pearl Harbor. However, it was the Nakajima B5Ms that performed the bombing runs at Pearl Harbor, with the Zero fighters solely performing air control and strafing. This cutscene shows that our character, Private Miller, is in the 34th Infantry Division of the US Army, but then immediately after this we are put in a mission where we are in the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion.
Makin Atoll. Little more than sand, trees, and a small Japanese military base.
There were 2 submarines involved in the Makin Island raid, the USS Nautilus, which we see depicted here, and the USS Argonaut, which we do not see depicted. The game states that the USS Nautilus was 1,113 meters long. Yeah, over a kilometer. This is of course a typo as the actual Nautilus was 113 meters long. But still, they really should not be getting such small things like this wrong. The Japanese camp on Makin Island was located on the southwestern area of the island. However, the game here shows it located in the northwest.
Miller's reconnaissance team landed there almost a week ago.
There was no reconnaissance team sent into Makin Island, as the raid on the island was planned to be a surprise attack, so sending a reconnaissance team in would only jeopardize this element of surprise. Also, even if a reconnaissance team was sent, sending them in an entire week before the attack would be very excessive. The helmet is a highly effective piece of protective gear used by soldiers, and is the first thing Sergeant Sullivan gives us after rescuing us, thus highlighting its importance. However, him and everybody else in his squad are not wearing helmets themselves for some reason. Instead, some of the Marines are wearing 1944 USMC utility caps, which, as the name would suggest, was not introduced until 1944. Also, the camouflage uniforms the Marines wear in this mission were not introduced until 1943. Roebuck has the insignia of a sergeant on his uniform, with the rank of corporal on his name tag. The Type 100 SMG did not enter service until late 1942, and the Pacific one we see in-game is a model of the weapon not produced until 1944. The Thompson SMG seen in the game is the M1A1 Thompson, which was not standardized by the US military until October 1942. The real Makin Island raid was much larger than portrayed in the game, with it involving over 200 Marines and lasting 2 days, whereas this mission is over in a matter of minutes. Also, many key details from this battle are missing. The high prevalence of Japanese snipers, the eventual air attacks, and the Marines' chaotic extraction from the island caused by the harsh weather and boat motors failing are nowhere to be seen. Here we see what is supposed to be battleships during the Battle of Midway. However, this carrier is a modern-day, nuclear-powered Nimitz-class aircraft carrier which did not exist during World War II. And these 2 vessels are Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers which did not enter service until 1978.
Years after the raid on Makin, we're heading up an all-out assault on Peleliu Island, alongside familiar faces, fresh-faced recruits. The older guys like Miller, Sergeant Sullivan, and myself. We're known as the old breed.
Exactly, because years of active combat tend to give experience and promotions, yet our characters still somehow all have the same rank that they had 2 years prior during the Makin Island raid. The US LVT landing craft should have 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns attached to them.
Navy's been bombing the hell out of the island for 2 days straight!
The US Navy's bombardment before the attack on Peleliu Island lasted 3 days.
Move up! I want you up the beach and at that that tree line ASAP!
The acronymization of as soon as possible to ASAP was created and popularized by the US Army in 1955. Here we call in a rocket barrage from the LCI-R ships, which precisely destroys the enemy defenses on the beach. Later on, we use the same rocket strikes to destroy Japanese tanks further inland with pinpoint accuracy. However, these rocket launchers attached to the LCI ships were renowned for being inaccurate, as they were fixed in position, meaning that they could only be aimed by moving the entire ship. No, Japanese resistance was expected at Peleliu, just not nearly to the scale that it actually was. This M1911 not only has 8 rounds in its mag when it should only have 7, but it also has the Series 80 frame, which was not introduced until the 1980s. It goes without saying that the ray gun obviously did not exist, but the story behind this is quite interesting. During the development of this mission, a Treyarch developer named Jesse Schneider snuck this Easter egg in without informing his supervisors, so when the player base eventually discovered it, Treyarch were furious at Jesse and actually very almost fired him for adding it, which kinda just goes to show just how much the COD developers used to care about portraying history in a faithful and non-cartoonish way. Throughout the levels on Peleliu Island, the Japanese soldiers perform constant banzai charges at us. However, this is incorrect, as in actuality, the commander of the Japanese forces on Peleliu Island, Sadue Inoue, opposed banzai charges and forbid his soldiers from using such tactics. The Type 92 machine guns do not have any ammunition feeding into them, yet they still somehow fire and even apparently have unlimited ammo. Here we see large amounts of US B-17 bombers. However, by 1944, this type of aircraft was almost entirely phased out in the Pacific theater and replaced with the more capable B-24s. Here we use an M7 grenade launcher on our M1 Garand. However, the NK2 grenades we fire are incorrectly fitted with the M1A1 adapters when they should be the M1 adapters. The game depicts multiple waves of Japanese tanks. However, in reality, there was only one tank-supported counterattack that launched when the Marines first reached the airfield. And it was during this counterattack that the tanks managed to penetrate the Marines' lines to almost reach the beachhead, which is a detail missing from this level. The mission shows the Japanese forces using Type 97 medium tanks. However, in reality, Type 95 light tanks were used at Peleliu. And the game shows the Japanese lightly armoured and short 57mm barreled Type 97 tanks absolutely destroying the much more heavily armoured and longer 75mm barreled M4 Shermans. Also, these tanks are fighting way too close to each other. Actual tank engagements occurred at a much larger distance of 500 meters or so. Here we fire Japanese Type 96 25mm AT/AA guns in triple mountings, which not only somehow have unlimited ammo, but are also solely operated by our character, despite the fact that these weapons typically required a 9-man crew to aim, load and operate. The airfield at Peleliu was captured by the 5th Marine Regiment on September 16th. However, the game depicts us taking the airfield while in the 1st Marine Regiment on September 15th. Apparently Turkey is still holding out strong against Germany. Must just be a coincidence that we can't find anything about the Great Battle of Istanbul in our history books. This cutscene shows footage of General Heinz Guderian, the German leader of the 2nd Panzer Army in its advancement towards Moscow during Operation Barbarossa. However, it misrefers to him as General Heinrich Amsel, who is a completely fictional character exclusive to this game. The heavy bombers used in Stalingrad were the HE-111s and the Jukas 88s. However, here we see an incredibly unrealistic and downright ridiculous amount of Luftwaffe FW-200 bombers in the skies of this mission. Only 276 of these aircraft were ever made, and they are used as marine patrol planes, not bombers at Stalingrad. All of the Red Army soldiers, including Sergeant Reznov, should be wearing the M35 uniform, but are instead wearing the M43 uniform with the stand collar and shoulder boards. However, this uniform was not introduced until after the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943. Reznov has a beard, which he shouldn't, since the only facial hair permitted in the Red Army at the time was mustaches for officers only. The PU scope on this Mauser Nugant is incorrect. General Amsel, as aforementioned, is a fictional character, and he is wearing a completely fictional uniform too. He should be wearing the one shown on screen now. The M43 field cap that the German soldiers are wearing never existed during the first stage of the Battle of Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht soldiers are all incorrectly wearing Waffen-SS belt buckles. Many of them can also be seen having the insignia of the national tricolours of the German Empire on their helmets. This should not be the case, as German High Command mandated against the use of this helmet insignia in 1940. Also, literally every one of the German soldiers all have the insignia of the lowest rank of private. The turret skirts and armor configuration of this tank indicate that it is a Panzer IV Auf H, without the side skirts. This is anachronistic as this variant of Panzer would not be produced until a year later in 1943. Also, this is a wreck of a Tiger II tank which did not enter production until 1944. After investigation, we can see that this German sniper is actually just a regular private using a Kart 98K without a scope. This means that there should not be a scope glint, and also means that all those times that this fella has instantly killed us while playing this mission in Veteran, he has technically been doing it while 180 no-scoping us. German soldiers using American M2 flamethrowers on the Eastern Front. I mean, did they even think before adding this? These Soviet soldiers are wielding SMGs but have rifle ammo pouches. This male Red Army soldier has the Russian surname Fedorova, which is a feminine form of the regular Fedorov. Here we can find and use a PTRS-41 as a sniper, and even fire from the shoulder while standing. However, the PTRS-41 is not a sniper rifle. It is a 2 meter long, 20 kg anti-tank rifle. There is absolutely no way that our character would be able to lift and use the weapon like shown in the game. Also, the PTRS-41 would never have a scope attached to it, because if the weapon was fired while your eye was pressed up against the scope, the immense recoil of the weapon would force the scope to dig right back into your eyeball. Norway did not become free from occupation until Germany's surrender in 1945, but according to this map, Norway must have had some sort of civil war and won, since it apparently isn't under German control anymore in 1941. Here it shows the Battle of Moscow in 1941, but portrays the Red Army soldiers again wearing the anachronistic M43 uniforms, while also being accompanied by T-34-85 tanks, which were not produced until 1944. And the German Wehrmacht forces are depicted wearing late war SS camo uniforms alongside the aforementioned Panzer IV Auf H tanks introduced in 1943. This mission's description states, break through the German defences in the town of Seelow, but when we look at the actual battle maps of the Battle of Seelow Heights, we can see that the 3rd Shock Army, which is the field army our characters are in, never directly attacked into the town of Seelow, with them instead advancing more northernly. Our Soviet character, Dmitry Petrenko, has the lowest rank of private in 1942 during the Battle of Stalingrad. Then, in 1945, he still has the rank of private, meaning that he somehow did not once receive a single promotion throughout the entire 3-year period of fighting in the Red Army. Why are these German soldiers keeping our character alive? He is, as just mentioned, merely a private, and they killed the other Red Army soldiers in the house, and even when we reach for a gun, all we get in retaliation is a kick from this fella.
Dmitri, finish those rats! Once again, you cheat death.
How has Dmitry and Reznov made it this far while keeping the same rank? Because they not only somehow survived this, and this.
You are a true monster!
But they also made it through the entire Battle of Stalingrad, which is extremely unlikely considering factors such as how soldiers fighting in Stalingrad had an estimated lifespan of a mere 24 hours. The hammer and sickle on all the Red Army soldiers' hats are backwards. Reznov is wearing an Ushanka hat and a big mad woolen trench coat, despite him operating in the hot spring sun of Germany. All the tin cans in the game are anachronistic, since they feature a riveted aluminium design and have pull tabs, which were not introduced until the 1960s. Here we see a signpost for Vendy, which is straight up just a fictional town, and also Zug Station, which is located 900 kilometers away in Switzerland. Here we use an MG42, however our character holds it by the barrel, risking getting burnt from the heat, and we also fired a machine gun from the hip and shoulder, which would be very difficult and downright impossible for the average person due to its weight and recoil. It also has a 50 round magazine on it, which somehow holds 150 rounds in the game. Throughout this entire campaign, we see that the only rocket launcher being used by the Germans is the Panzer Schreck. However, in reality, the Panzer Faust was a much more widespread and commonly used German rocket launcher, but is nowhere to be seen anywhere in-game. Nearly all the Soviet infantrymen are wearing stars on their belts, despite the fact that this type of belt buckle was only worn by commissioners. Many of the Japanese soldiers have the M sign chest mark, but this kind of insignia shouldn't appear on the uniform anymore since 1940. The M2 flamethrower could fire consistently for 7 seconds before running out of fuel. However, in the game we fire the flamethrower for 4 seconds before it then magically refuels itself. A very interesting detail in this game is that when firing at the Japanese soldiers with the flamethrower, some of them will say apai or panas, which is Indonesian for fire and hot respectively. This is actually a historical depiction of how the Imperial Japanese Army forcefully conscripted native Indonesians into Hanai units during their occupation of the Dutch East Indies.
They're making their last stand in the jungles and caves that surround the heavy guns on the point. We take them, and we take Peleliu.
No. The point, as it was referred to, was a 30-foot high coral ridge at the beaches of Peleliu Island that the Japanese used to engage the US forces from. It was taken by the Marines on the first few days of battle, and most certainly was not some big mountain or some extremely important position like the game is trying to tell us. Here we fire the M1919A6 Browning machine gun from the hip and shoulder, which was actually possible. In the game we hold the gun by the barrel, which is covered with a wet towel. This was indeed a practice performed by Marines to prevent burning from the barrel. However, the problem is that the heat from the barrel would dry the towel after about 50 shots of automatic fire, which meant that the dry towel would then set on fire if you were to continue shooting the gun like we do in the game. Many of the Japanese soldiers can be seen using the Type 100. However, this SMG was rare, with only about 7,500 of them being produced throughout the entire war, meaning that we should not see them nearly as commonly as we do in the game. Or infantrymen of Dmitry and Reznov somehow become trained and highly skilled tank operators, capable of single-handedly destroying waves of Panthers and King Tigers in an instant. The Battle of Seelow Heights did not end until the German defensive line was broken on April 19, 1945. However, the game here depicts the battle ending 3 days too early on April 16th. Also, the last mission set in Seelow Heights, where Reznov saves us, took place 2 days after this level on April 18th. So what the hell happened? Did the Germans retreat, capture Dmitry from the train, and then return to Seelow Heights with him? None of these dates make sense.
On the Fuhrer's birthday, a barrage of Katyusha rockets will tear Berlin to pieces!
It is a true fact that Soviet artillery began shelling Berlin on Hitler's 56th birthday of April 20th, 1945. However, the game here shows it being April 23rd, so it is 3 days off. Every one of the Soviet tanks in this level all somehow have American M1919 machine guns mounted on them. We can see the Reichstag building at the end of this mission. However, this would be impossible since we are a part of the 3rd Shock Army fighting in the very north of Pankow, Berlin, located very far from the center of the city where the Reichstag is.
Abandon your cause! Abandon your home! Abandon all! Hoorah!
Citizens of Berlin? Yeah, where are they? Because in reality, there was around 3 million civilians trapped in the city during the battle. And also, shouldn't he be saying this message in German if it is meant for the German citizens?
Throw a Molotov down there! Burn them!
The term Molotov cocktail was created by Finnish soldiers during the Winter War to mock the Soviet Foreign Minister Václav Molotov. So unless Reznov is secretly an enemy of the Soviet state, then he shouldn't be referring to them as Molotovs. Also, the lighter or Soviet character uses to ignite the Molotovs appears to somehow be an American 1930s pre-war Zippo lighter. The signs for the subway U-Bahn stations in this level are all over the place. It shows signs that indicate that stations such as Horst Wesselplatz, Friedrichstraße, Adolf Hitler Platz, and Frankfurter Allee 113 are all in the same area, when in reality they are all far away from each other. The U-Bahn tunnels were indeed purposely flooded, presumably by the SS during the Battle of Berlin to slow the Soviet advance. However, the game depicts this happening on April 24th, when in reality the tunnels were not flooded until the 2nd of May. Combat-used Black Cat PYB Catalinas did not have a twin 20mm nose cannon, and even if they wanted to add one, they would have to remove the front 30 caliber machine guns for it. The game tells us that we are part of Black Cat Squadron VPB-54, but this Pacific Patrol Bombing Squadron would soon be completely disestablished, with the squadron's personnel having already returned to the US and assigned to other squadrons a full month before the events of this mission. Here we destroy and sink 3 Japanese vessels using only 20mm cannon and 30 caliber fire, which would be near impossible in real life. It would be much more realistic if we used bombs or torpedoes to sink the enemy ships, which the Black Cats were actually armed with. However, they are missing in the game. There is no way that our Catalina would be able to successfully fight off and survive against this many Japanese Zero fighters. So, our aircraft just took a load of belly hits from the AA guns on the Japanese vessels, and then also received heavy fire from the enemy fighters, yet we still land in the water covered in bullet holes. You may guess why they would never do this in real life. All evidence points towards the battle being portrayed in this mission being part of Operation Kikusi, which did not launch until April 6, 1945, 3 days after the date shown in the game. Some of the US vessels depicted in this mission, such as the USS Halford, USS Charette, and USS Gatling, were not involved or even in the area of the battle, and some of the ships, such as the USS Balanon, straight up did not exist. Once again, our anachronistic, modern-day US carriers and battleships return. I mean, come on, Treyarch, this is some Vanguard level nonsense! This level begins with us capturing Wanna Ridge on May 14th. However, in reality it took several days of fighting for US Marines to conquer this ridge from the 12th to the 19th of May. We start this mission carrying both an M2 flamethrower and M1919A6 with over 400 bullets, along with fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, and satchel charges, which when added together is over 70 kgs or 150 pounds of weight, an impossible heaviness to carry and work with in such an operation like this. Most of the land and vegetation on Okinawa was completely charred up and destroyed as a result of weeks of constant harsh shelling, bombing and fighting, yet we see much of the vegetation still intact in the game. The US Marine Corps men, such as the one seen here, should not be wearing any Red Cross insignia on their uniforms, as they were advised not to, due to the fact that it only made them stand out and become easier targets for the Japanese soldiers on Okinawa who had little care for the rules of engagement. The start of this cutscene not only shows US Marines heading to the north of the island when they should be instead heading towards the Japanese forces in the south, but also shows them walking towards the Kakazu Ridge, which had already been captured a month before the engagement at Wanna Ridge. The 1,000 yard stare was actually known during World War II as the 2,000 yard stare.
But this is the last time we're going to have to put our lives on the line. This is the enemy's last stand. When we take Shuri Castle, we go home. All of us.
What? No! Pretty much the entirety of this level is complete fiction! Shuri Castle was not the last stand of the Japanese forces on Okinawa. In late May, as the US forces fought their way towards the Shuri line, pretty much all of the Japanese soldiers evacuated the castle. So when the US forces arrived, they were met with very little resistance, meaning no massive bonsai charges, no mortar crews, no last second aircraft bombings, and no massive scale last stand defense like we see in the game.
Word is, main force pulled back to the North Ridge.
Wrong again. By this time, the Japanese forces had retreated to the south of the island, not the north. Shuri Castle had been shelled by the US Navy for 3 consecutive days prior to the arrival of the US ground forces, resulting in it getting completely devastated and lighting ablaze. However, the buildings in this game are all almost completely intact. Also, the colour, surrounding area and the castle itself are completely anachronistic, as they seem to be based on the 1992 reconstruction of the castle. The mortar shells we captured from the Japanese have American designations on them. Here we fire an M1 carbine, however the game incorrectly refers to it as an M1A1 carbine, meaning it would have a folding stock, which is not the case here.
You will be okay! You hear me? They flooded their own metro in an effort to kill us, Dimitri.
So Reznov is only now dragging us out of the U-Bahn tunnels? Because the game depicted it getting flooded on April 24th. So was Dimitri just stuck drowning in the tunnels for 6 days straight? Also, there was no U-Bahn station in this sector of Berlin.
Which do you think will lead us home? Writing about this war or fighting it?
Threaten Germany in the blood.
No one will ever read this! Dmitri! Someone should read this.
All historians worldwide just let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Reznov, for preserving this vital piece of primary source historical evidence. The surrounding area of the Reichstag is completely off. Many iconic landmarks such as the Kroll Opera House and the Tiergarten Park are missing. Oh, what? This is just ridiculous! I do remember reading about how the final ragtag group of German soldiers casually had 47 million grenades each. Throughout this campaign, we see the Germans using FG-42s. However, this weapon was produced in very limited numbers and was designed for and used by German Luftwaffe paratroopers, not Wehrmacht soldiers. Hitler died on April 30th, not the 1st of May.
Fire the Panzerschreck!
That is not a Panzerschreck, it is an M191 bazooka. Also, seeing the Red Army using American bazookas, although not completely impossible due to the land lease, it would still be incredibly unlikely as the US only sent about 3,000 of them, and the Soviets were discouraged from using them due to lack of rockets and them finding more success with their own anti-tank weapons. The black uniforms that the SS soldiers are wearing in this level were permanently phased out in 1942. Here we see the main hall of the Reichstag being defended fiercely. However, in reality, German forces in the building had retreated back to the basement and cellars during the Soviet assault. Also, the main hall itself had been completely destroyed by a fire that occurred in 1933, meaning the hall should not be nearly as intact and built up as shown in the game. Again, German soldiers using American M2 flamethrowers, and also one bullet would not be able to completely explode the whole thing like we do in the game here. The SS officers should have the Totenkopf skull on their hats. The Soviet national anthem that plays here
Should be yours.
is the post-war 1977 edition when it should be the 1945 edition. The Soviet flag was raised atop of the Reichstag on the night of April 30th, 1945, not at daytime. This and most importantly, this end credit message of dedicated to the veterans of World War II who sacrificed their lives for the preservation of liberty are exactly why Call of Duty World at War, although having a total of 122 historical inaccuracies, is still beloved by history enjoyers, for through it all it always managed to stay historically authentic, portrayed World War II in the truly dark and brutal conflict that it was, and most significantly stayed utterly respectful to the people and events it was depicting, which is sadly a lot more that can be said about the newer COD titles. And say, if you do wish to see a truly laughable and downright insulting butchering of history, then click on this video where we list the historical inaccuracies in Call of Duty Vanguard, or this one where we do the same with the extremely fictitious Black Ops Cold War. And with that, I thank you for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. This has been the Frosty One, over and out.